near 27th Avenue in Maryland. And that driver communicated with the defendant that I'm going to be talking about, Devontae Thornton, Devonte, Thornton, common spelling, who was at that apartment complex. Once the officers were near, Mr. Thornton stepped out and he ambushed the two officers. Police located and retrieved 18 shell casings from the scene. So if you take a look at the next images, you'll see just how close the officers came to being struck by a bullet. The trajectory of the bullets aimed right at the officers' heads. One of the bullets did injure one of the officer's arms, but fortunately he's going to be okay. Thornton pled guilty to aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. That is a Class 2 dangerous felony, and late last week he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. And this is flat time, meaning he has to serve it day for day. I can't stress enough how deliberate and outright this attack was. I come to work every day, as does everybody in this building, and we know that the work of police officers is dangerous. They put themselves in harm's way, but this is not just being in harm's way. This was an unprovoked attack on officers. So, given that today is National Police Officers Memorial Day, I want to thank the officers who put their lives on the line each and every day as you go to work to keep us safe. And I also want to thank the families of those officers who wait for them to get home. The wives, the husbands, the children, parents, siblings. They help keep me safe, they keep you safe, and everyone in our community. Unfortunately, we live in a world that does have a lot of violence against men and women in blue, and it goes without saying that they are in our constant prayers for a safe return home. So with that, I will open it up for your questions.
County Attorney Mitchell.
Hi.
How come you're not seeking the death penalty against those charged in the killing of Preston Lord?
One thing that you have to start off understanding is that under United States constitutional law, you cannot seek the death penalty for a crime committed by somebody who was under 18 at the time of the crime. So even if they turn 18, that doesn't change. So what that would entail then is essentially seeking the death penalty against half of the defendants, or approximately half, and not the other half. That would assume that those that you seek it against may be the primary actors or the most severe actors. You can't assume that, and so based on all of that, the decision was, I made the decision not to do that. And, I want to point out the process that I go through to get to that because, I look at every single first-degree murder case committed by an 18-year-old or older that comes through our doors. First of all, it is worked on extensively by a senior trial attorney. It is put in front of a committee who analyzes it, makes a recommendation to me, but the final decision is mine. And what I am looking for is truly the worst of the worst. I am looking for something that transcends to the point of, frankly, evil in some cases. And so based on that and based on the factors that I described earlier, we will not be seeking the death penalty.
Okay. And where was I? What was the point of classifying the Gilbert Goons as a gang if no one's going to be held accountable for gang activity?
Well, keep in mind the activities that they were responsible for were committed prior to the police agencies seeking that classification. But there's nothing wrong with getting that documented and in the system and being tracked. But the fact remains, as I've said multiple times, there was a full presentation made to the grand jury that includes information related to the gang-like activity, and the grand jury returned the charges that they returned.
Okay. And last question, do you plan to file charges against the pro-Palestinian protesters arrested on ASU's campus?
At this point, we do not have a submittal related to the protesters on ASU's campus, so I can't even speculate whether we would or not.
Thank you.
Hi, County Attorney Mitchell, how are you?
Hi, good, how are you?
Lower this a little bit. I have a couple of questions related to just the dynamics of the Gilbert Goons and other hybrid gangs. You know, police call the Goons and the Jack Boy Mafia hybrid gangs. Can you give me examples of other hybrid gangs?
Well, without trying to classify a specific gang, what I would say is this, criminal street gangs is defined in statute. Hybrid gangs is not a term that's defined in statute. But when people are using it, as I said, I think at my last press conference, I think they're trying to address behavior that really does fit the definition of a gang, but does not look like the traditional gang. So, for example, a hybrid gang may not wear colors, or they may not have signs that they flash or symbols. There may not be the same type of hierarchy involved, but they still fit other criteria. So I think it's an attempt to address that by using a slightly different term.
Do you think that that definition might evolve over time and become more solidified in statute? Do you think that might happen?
I don't know, because what we're looking at is the criteria listed in statute to determine whether something is a gang or not. And so you can still do that even if they are behaving as a hybrid gang, as people are using the term.
Yeah, and speaking of behavior, is there any evidence that the Goons and the Jack Boy Mafia work together but also fight each other, and or members just trading sides? Is there any evidence of that right now?
Well, I don't want to go into the specifics of this case because it's ongoing, but what I can say is that we are aware of that type of behavior in general happening where that can occur.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
County Attorney. A couple questions about the Preston Lord case and then a couple of questions about a separate case.
Okay.
Can you explain the decision that your office came to for extending plea agreements to some associated with East Valley teen violence cases not affiliated with the Preston Lord case?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you for saying that. That's one thing I want to emphasize is the three cases that were reported on, one of them, of course, is from Pinal County Attorney, are not related. They're not involving the Preston Lord death. But that said, obviously we take them seriously. But just to give you some numbers, this office receives submittals from police officers over 50,000 per year. It would be absolutely impossible for us. It would be impossible for the courts, and frankly, the defense bar could not absorb it either, to take every one of those cases to trial. So there are plea deals that are offered in the vast majority of cases. But I think people hear that and they think that people aren't going to be held accountable. That's simply not true. Plea deals can be very beneficial in terms of, and I'm speaking generically, I'm not talking about any particular case, where you have multiple defendants and you have one defendant who, in order to plead guilty, admits guilt and describes what happened. That can be helpful in obtaining convictions against other people. If you have multiple defendants, there's always a risk of the cases being severed for trial, and so now you have a victim who doesn't have to sit through one trial but has to go through three. That may not be the victim's preference. We always do talk to the victim. And it also allows us to tailor the punishment specifically toward that individual. So there's a lot of benefits, and people should not assume that that means that they're not being held accountable. And while I'm addressing that, I do want to say that I've seen in a couple of places, and I don't remember which news agencies, a report that neither defendant, and it may have included the Pinal ones, I'm not sure, will get any days in jail, and that's not accurate. With a probation grant, anybody is eligible for up to a year in jail unless there's an agreement otherwise. There is no otherwise agreement here, so they are eligible for jail. So to the extent that that's being reported, that's simply not the case.
And you're saying that will be determined at sentencing, which I believe is coming up next month.
Correct. The judge can impose that. It's actually imposed as a term of probation. The other thing I would point out is, when I was just talking about the police officers, what happened to them, that was an aggravated assault. That was a Class 2 felony. As you know, felonies are ranked from 1 to 6. In Arizona, 1 is the most serious. So this is a Class 2 felony. The class felonies that we're talking about in these cases, as far as aggravated assaults, are 6s. These are involving fights. They're not involving weapons. They're not involving serious physical injury.
And just to be clear, in looking at the agreement, the way it's laid out prior to sentencing, it appears to be community service and probation. Jail time is not included in the agreement ahead of time, but you're saying the judge could add on jail time. If jail time is not added, there's been some criticism amongst the East Valley saying this looks like a slap on the wrist to them. How would you respond to that?
Well, you don't have to talk about jail in the plea agreement for it to be available. Any probation grant that's a felony, a year in jail is available to the judge to impose. And I would also say that kind of hangs over the defendant's head throughout the probationary period. So even if the judge determines not to give jail right now at sentencing, if the person is not doing well on probation, not doing what they've been asked to do, that jail can be revisited and imposed because it's treated as a term of probation.
A document was filed by your office last week relating the Preston Lord murder case with 7 other, I believe, East Valley assault cases. I believe it said it will allow attorneys to share information and evidence potentially if it's related to their cases. Could this help lead to gang charges showing the connection between multiple assault cases involving either the same players or folks that are very clearly affiliated with each other?
Well, keep in mind, we have in the county attorney's office that information. Law enforcement has that information. The reason that we're making it all available to the defense is because, as you know, there's a lot of crossover in terms of actors and witnesses and that type of thing. And rather than, pick and choose what we're going to give this defense attorney that's relevant to this case, we don't want there to be anybody left in the dark if there's other information out there. So we have a responsibility under the rules of criminal procedure to give what we have relating to a case to the defense. And we take that very seriously. So we are making all of it available to each of the defense attorneys on all of the cases.
So it wouldn't have really any impact in connecting these cases in your office to leading to gang charges or connecting, groups with each other or members with each other?
The fact that those investigations may overlap may result in that. Giving it to the defense to make sure everybody has everything is probably not going to result in that.
And then just a couple of questions about a case that we covered yesterday out of juvenile court. It involved a 14-year-old girl who was killed in a UTV crash up in Scottsdale. A 14-year-old boy was driving the UTV, obviously he didn't have a license. The parents of that 14-year-old victim have expressed frustration and disappointment about the juvenile proceeding, how quickly it had to go, the fact that a plea agreement was offered quickly, and the focus being around rehabilitation exclusively as opposed to consequences or accountability. How do parents of victims in the juvenile system get justice?
I can't even imagine being in the position of the parents of the victim in this case. It's sometimes it's never going to seem right. If it's in the juvenile system, it may be too fast, and if it's in the adult system, it may seem too slow. The bottom line is you cannot fully restore them. They lost their daughter. But that said, the state of Arizona has determined that the juvenile court system is focused on rehabilitation. And so when there is a plea to a count in juvenile, and I'm going to speak generically, the judge has a lot of latitude as far as what to impose on that juvenile. It's not like adult court where they're could be stipulations. Yeah, a lot of times there are no stipulations. The judge is just deciding what the sentence ought to be. And because of that, it can happen more quickly. And it probably seems like breakneck speed, in terms of it would take your breath away if you lost somebody and have it that fast happen. But that is the nature of the juvenile court system, and my heart goes out to them. I can't even imagine what they're going through.
In another follow-up on that case, the parents have also expressed frustration that there was no accountability for the parents of the 14-year-old. He was allowed access to the UTV and obviously somehow, some way got the keys to it. Can you talk a little bit about parental responsibility and specifically in this case, if charges were ever recommended or brought to your office looking at the parents?
Yeah, I mean, we recently saw, I think it was out of Michigan, a case where parents actually were found guilty and were sentenced to prison for the behavior of their child. And what I would say is the fact that that was national news, and it was in the national news quite a bit, just goes to show it's not a common occurrence, because you have to have a very set type of fact pattern in order to be able to do that successfully. What you're looking for as a prosecutor to hold parents responsible is not only that they're aware of the potential to do that, but they facilitate it in some method, which is what pretty much happened in the Michigan case. Having a kid gain access to something and do something that the kid should not do in and of itself does not mean that the parents are criminally responsible. Different than civilly responsible, but criminally responsible.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Bianca, you also asked me if charges were recommended against the parents. No. By the police, no. Yeah.
Hi, Rachel. Brian at Fox 10.
Hi, Brian.
Just an overview on the goons. Do you see anything along the way, beginning to finish, that strikes you as favorable treatment in any way, whether it be no cameras in the courtroom? I assume the judge made that decision. It seemed like some arrests took longer than we might have seen in other cases. Any word to your constituents that this is not in any way favorable treatment to any of the suspects?
You know what, Brian? I did not see any sort of favoritism here. There was a lot going on behind the scenes. This was very complicated. It's funny. I was out Friday night addressing a group of citizens of Maricopa County, and somebody brought up, why isn't this going faster? There's all of this evidence. And it's interesting, that evidence that they were talking about does not exist. So the police were working very hard to put a case together. As we've talked about in the past in these press conferences, it's not just a matter of downloading a video off of the internet. You have to find out somebody that can put that into evidence and say that that is an accurate depiction of what happened. Otherwise, it's not admissible. And you're also going to scour both the internet and looking at witnesses to make sure that you have everything. You may have something from a different angle. You may have a video that takes place 10 seconds before the video that you have starts, or 10 seconds afterwards that gives different context. You have witnesses that may or may not be cooperative. This is an extremely complicated case. And so to that end, I think the police did a very good job putting it together. So.
Do you mind me asking about cameras in courtrooms?
Oh, cameras in courtrooms. I believe the ruling by the judge was that the juvenile suspects or defendant's face was not to be filmed. Is that correct? I don't know that that's an unusual thing. If that juvenile was in juvenile court, it wouldn't be different.
Does that go for the three who are not juveniles? Somebody help me out.
It was all of them? Okay. I mean, it's up to the judge, and the judge controls the courtroom. I'm not shocked by that at all, and I have a great deal of respect for this particular judge, and I have practiced many years in front of him and have found him to be very fair and appropriate and thoughtful.
got a question about the timing on the notice of intent, or not issuing one for the goons.
Mhm.
You have 60 days, right? Okay, so like you have that amount of time. Did you need that full allotment of time to make this decision?
It's not uncommon that those decisions are kind of bumping up against that 60-day time frame. As you know, I do this all the time with every first-degree murder case. And, you know, the bottom line is you want to use that time because you want to get the maximum amount of information before you make that decision. And sometimes that can include waiting for the defense to provide you with information that I would consider in making that decision. So not only is it not unusual, but it's actually a good idea.
Okay, so it's good practice. And we were just wondering if maybe it was also indicative of the serious nature of this case and this decision in particular.
No, I mean, like I said, it's not uncommon for the decision to be being made at or very close to that deadline.
Okay, and then did I understand you correctly that you said because half of them or close to half of them are juveniles and not death eligible, you decided not to seek death for any of them?
That's part of the consideration, but I wanted to point that out, that that would be the result if we did that, number one. Number two, you can't assume that the ones that, in that scenario, that the ones that you are alleging the death penalty on may be the primary actors. They may not be the primary actors. And so, I'm looking at a multitude of factors to make that decision. Those are some of those factors, but I also am following my normal procedure that I follow in every case where I'm looking for, like I talked about earlier, I mean, truly the worst of the worst stand out.
What is the perceived inequity there, or the injustice? If you say only half of them are death eligible, so I'm not comfortable with going forward with anyone. Like, what is your perceived element there that you don't feel is right? That doesn't sit right with you.
Well, again, I think we're hanging our hat too much on one nail. That's one nail. But, I mean, certainly these people are not separated by decades in age. They're separated by sometimes months in age. And there could be, in some cases, varying degrees of involvement. There's just a lot that you have to look at. And so, is it a situation where a matter of months determines whether you have the death penalty alleged against you? I have to take that into account and look at the equity of that.
Yeah, okay, that's exactly what I was going for.
Right.
And so then finally, is that a standard that you would use in other cases? So, if there are multiple defendants in a death eligible case, but one of them is a juvenile, would you not seek death for any of them?
No, I would not make that statement, that I would blanket statement. There are situations where it might be very different. What I'm trying to convey to you is I am going to look at every relevant factor before I make a decision, and there may be some that overcome that situation. There may be some that don't.
Got it, thank you.
Hi, County Attorney Mitchell, Ashley Holden with ABC15. Wanted to ask you about the Allison Feldman murder case. There has been a battle over crucial DNA evidence. What's your response to the state Supreme Court agreeing to take oral arguments and take up this case?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're going to be prepared to present our case to them. We were successful at the Arizona Court of Appeals. I've spoken with the father, and you can imagine what they're feeling right now. But we're ready to defend our case and make sure that evidence is available to us.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hey, County Attorney. Are you, of course, the Republicans are trying to, in the legislature, trying to pass this secure border, or put it on the ballot, that is.
You're talking about the concurrent resolution?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you support that, or would you support it?
Yeah, we had a press conference last week, and I did speak at the press conference in support of that. And I realize it's a multifaceted bill. concurrent resolution. My focus on that is the portion that addresses the fentanyl. I think people are not fully aware of just how bad that crisis is. And the bill or the concurrent resolution does contain a provision to hold people responsible who provide fentanyl and somebody dies from that. But I will say this, that there was a subsequent amendment to that portion of the resolution that very likely renders that really unenforceable. So we're going to have to see what the final form is on that before I make any more comments on it.
Aren't we just going through SB 1070 again? Isn't this going to lead to an explosion of racial profiling? How does a cop know that someone's in the country illegally? They have to stop them, ask them, where are your papers?
Well, and I would refer you back to the series of questions that were asked and answered by Yavapai Sheriff Rhodes on that.
Well, I'd like to hear your answer.
Well, I don't think that this is 1070. I looked at it very carefully, and as I said at the press conference, I'm not here to say that this is a perfect bill. What I am completely intolerant of any discrimination. But what I can tell you for sure is this: fentanyl does not discriminate, and fentanyl is killing citizens at a rate that is unbelievable.
What does fentanyl have to do with immigration?
Fentanyl has to do with the border.
It has to do with the border, and who's bringing it over the border? Often American citizens. So how does your immigration proposal hit that?
Steve, if you have any questions to ask me
That's a
about, I'm happy to answer
That's
them.
a question.
If you want to debate, we can do that at a separate
It's
time.
not a debate, but fentanyl, tell me how fentanyl has something to do with immigration. Not the border specifically, but immigration.
I'm talking about the border. So if you have any specific questions, I'll answer them.
Well, I'm
Otherwise, we
asking
can
you
debate it
about
later.
This could cost the county a lot of money.
Mhm.
Okay, they have different estimates, $300 million, what it could cost the state.
Mhm.
It's gonna cost the county a lot of money because you're gonna need more prosecutors
Mhm.
to make these decisions. And this is basically Andy Thomas all over again.
It is not Andy Thomas all over again, number one. Number two, the cost should alert you to just how extensive this problem is. So thanks.
Well,
We can talk later
oh,
about
that's
it.
another question for you.
All right.
Recently you had this ad out talking about you don't want Valley to become a hellscape,
Yes.
but like these other cities, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, etc. As you probably recall, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg pointed out that as far as the murder rate goes, not the number of murders, but the murder rate for Maricopa County is less than New York City. And if you compare the crime rates in Maricopa County to many of these cities, they're comparable, or in some cases, these cities have lower crime rates. So is Phoenix a hellscape now under your watch?
Well, I'll tell you what, Katie Hobbs has not deployed the National Guard to protect the light rail, but the governor of New York has deployed the National Guard to protect the subway system. We can talk about stats, but I'm not going to deny what I see with my own eyes.
Yeah, well, that's a nice deflection, but you didn't answer the question.
That's not a deflection. That's what I see
There
with
are
my
a
own
lot of
eyes.
murders in this city.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, you didn't answer the question.
Well, you're just here to debate. I'm here to provide information.
You're a public official, and I'm giving you questions, and you're deflecting. That's
Next
what a
question,
politician
please.
does.
Hey,
Hey, just a quick question. I know there's still kind of a moving target with the 1864 abortion law, and if it will actually ever take effect. I'm just wondering if it were to take effect, is that something that your office would enforce?
I don't think based on the recent ruling that that's going to happen. So, and I would also point out that in the 2 years since the Dobbs decision came down, and it's been about, I think, 2 years in June, is that right? Not a single submittal has been received by any county attorney's office in Arizona related to abortion. So the focus of this office is on keeping people safe, on violent and repetitive crime.
Thank you.
Okay, blame Stephen, he prompted my curiosity. So, could you elaborate on what you see with your own eyes in those cities that you equate with the hellscape?
I think I did address that, and that was a National Guard deployed to keep the subways safe. I mean, the news is replete with stories about New York City. The statistics that have been unveiled by some of those cities and some of those crimes, you have to look at and say, because of the failure to prosecute by the DAs, or state's attorneys, whatever they call themselves, there may be less submittals because they know the police know there's no point. And beyond that, there may be fewer reports because the citizens know that the police aren't going to submit it. So there's an entire domino effect that affects those statistics, and that's why I'm saying I see it with my eyes.
Have you been to all 3 cities?
Yes,
You've been to Chicago.
even Chicago.
Okay, what do you think is the hellscape about Chicago?
I haven't been there since it was taken over by the radical policies.
Can you name one?
No bail.
Is that a current policy for Cook County or something?
Yeah,
You're talking about
Illinois passed a
state? Oh,
statute.
right, statewide,
Yeah.
right. See,
Yeah.
I'm talking about Chicago.
See, now we're getting into debate.
Okay, all right.
I'll answer questions about the cases in the office. But yes, the bail. And that's why the focus of this office has been on covering the initial appearance court 24 hours a day and seeking not high bail, but appropriate bail for people who are committing violent and repeat offenses.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I just had a coworker text me, so I just wanted to make sure if I could get it in.
Sure.
So I guess state lawmakers just passed a bill defining child enticement as a new criminal offense. The law makes it a felony to take any steps in furtherance of the sexual abuse of a minor or to facilitate the sexual abuse of a minor. Do you agree with supporters of this bill who say it will make it easier to prosecute child sex predators before they physically abuse a victim? Sorry, I know that's a very long question.
I think I know which bill you're talking about, but before I answer definitively on that, and I want to make sure, number one, that it wasn't amended, and number two, we're talking about the same bill. So I'm happy to answer that question later.
Okay.
But I mean, obviously, I've spent my career protecting kids, so I'm for things that protect kids in general.
One simple question, not a debate. Do you trust the FBI's UCR statistics? Yes or no?
That's a debate.
It's not a debate. It's a yes or no
That's
question.
Stephen.
You can't,
Stephen.
you can't
Does
answer
anybody
yes
else
or
have
no.
a question?
Anybody else?
It's a very easy question.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good day, everybody.